Okay. Again, let me repeat, thank you very much, all of you, for joining this session. We have 33 participants at the moment. We have our speaker, Louis-Philippe, that I think now we'll have the opportunity to talk after that this awful convener actually shut up for a while. So Louis-Philippe, thank you for your patience. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Corrado, and thank you everyone for taking the time on your busy schedule. I believe we're in the UK at 6 p.m., so thank you so much for talking with me about or hearing me talk about experiencing flow metrics. I gotta say, first thing is, since I'm a Scrum trainer, I'm a trainer with Scrum.org since 2011. I've become a pro Kanban trainer at the end of 2020. So this is mostly going to be a conversation about how I'm using flow metrics, mostly within the Scrum framework, but at the same time, I'll try to pitch in maybe some other experience that I've had with flow metrics, maybe outside of Scrum. And so that's who I am right now on the screen share. I'm also the founder of Pacemaker. It's a tool to visually see flow metrics within your team. This is going to be a Mentimeter presentation, which means that you can interact with me. If this is the first time you're using or are playing with Mentimeter, you go to the menti.com website that you are seeing at the top of my screen share, and you just punch in that number, that code that says 82976815. And if you do that on your phone, you'll be able to answer questions. I'll have little surveys along the way to keep everybody interested on my conversation, and we can interact and poll the group on some specific questions. First thing I want to show or bring to everybody's attention is maybe one of the last State of Agile report where there's always quizzes about or surveys about the adoption of Agile. Are we doing more safe, Kanban, Scrum? And something that always strikes me year after year is the use of those Kanban practices. And more specifically, if you look on the left side of my screen, you're seeing that Kanban is a practice being used by 61% of people who have answered that survey. And on the right side of that screenshot of that survey, it says that which agile planning and delivery tools are you currently using? And at the top of that list is a Kanban board. And so this is awesome. When I'm reading this, I'm telling myself, great, I'm going to go doing consulting work with people, and I'm going to talk to them about flow metrics because flow metrics can be used on a Kanban board, and they'll get it. And most of the time, people are looking at me and asking, what are flow metrics? What are you talking about? What is an SLE, service level expectation? What's that thing about age that you're talking about? So there's a disconnect. There's something that's not right in the Agile community, the Kanban community, about where we're positioning those practices, those Kanban and Kanban board practices. Because when I'm interacting in my experience or in my market, when I'm interacting with people, they barely know what we're talking about when I'm talking about flow metrics. And what is more surprising is if you're looking at that State of Agile survey year after year, Scrum and Kanban are really high up at the top of what are being used right now as ways of doing Agile. So Scrum is usually at the top, and Kanban most recently has been number 2. So a lot of people are using Kanban, a lot of people are using Scrum, but when I'm talking about flow metrics, a lot of people in my experience have no idea what I'm talking about. So there's two ways of seeing this for me is we've missed something, or there's an opportunity to educate our customers, our people, our colleagues about the value of using flow metrics within our teams. So before we dive into a bit more about flow metrics and my experience using them, I'd like to poll the audience about your own experience with flow metrics. So this is a good place to go on menti.com, either on your phone or on another tab in your browser, and punch in that code to answer a really simple question is, what is your level of experience with flow metrics? So we are about about 30 people, 25 to 30 people in the room. So I'll let some people answer that survey for maybe 30 seconds. And when it will get to about 15 to 20 answer, I'll move on and maybe comment a little bit the response of the survey. So we are at 14 people. I'll just cross my finger that people are logging to menti.com and answering the survey. We are now at 18. So this is going to be a great group because we've got 6 people who are using them, 5 who tried to put them in place, and 7 who've heard about them and haven't used them. And we've just got 1 person who has never heard about them. So this is going to be fun because maybe I'm already talking about people who have converted themselves to flow metrics instead of using maybe story points or velocities or things like that. And at the same time, it's going to be an interesting conversation, mostly at the Q&A at the end, where maybe you'll have your feedback that you can share with other participants on how we could get more traction in our different industries to have flow metrics maybe become a new standard to replace velocity or story points. So just a quick recap on what are flow metrics. Our flow metrics 101 is that we've got 4 flow metrics. The first one is the work in progress, which is the number of work items that have started on our board but are not finished. The second one is going to be our throughput, which is the number of work items finished per unit of time. And we've got to know that that measurement of throughput is the exact count of work items. And what I like about this definition is that we're talking about finished work item. We're not going to talk about done work items in the sense of Scrum. We're really talking about when it gets out of our workflow. The third one is the work item age, which is the amount of elapsed time between when a work item started and its current time today. And finally, once our work item is completed, we've got our cycle time, which is the amount of elapsed time between when a work item has started and when it has finished. So in this presentation, this Menti presentation, each time I'm talking about those flow metrics, I'm going to refer them to those definitions, and they're coming out of the Kanban guide definitions. So I'm really not reinventing the wheel here. This is all stated and posted on the web on kanbanguides.org. So my first question when I'm entering let's say I'm meeting a new customer or I'm being hired doing a consultant work, and they might be interested in using flow metrics. They've seen a conference, read a couple of books, read a blog article. The first question I'm going to ask them is, what are you trying to solve, Mr. Customer? What is the problem that is at hand? And maybe the flow metrics could solve that issue. So really before we start saying, I've learned this new stuff called flow metric, I'm usually going to have to ask a step back to my customer and what is that thing that we're trying to solve? So since we've got an experienced group here with flow metrics, in your experience, what have you been trying to solve with flow metrics? So somebody has answered speed to value. And once again, you can go on your phone and type in your answer. This is going to take a little bit more time because you're not clicking a number. You've got to punch in a couple of words in here. So we're looking also for predictability. We want to keep focus, the pace and stable delivery. We want to make workload visible. Predictability is starting to show up a little bit more. So for this group, a need or a problem of predictability seems to be our first angle of attack that we might look for implementing flow metrics within your customers or your teams. Thank you, everybody, by the way, to answering the question. This helps me a lot during the conversation. So let's see what I've experienced in my own market around here in Quebec City. Well, the first thing, yeah, and this wasn't prepared with any of you guys. The first thing I'm usually trying to solve when I'm being asked about flow metrics is also an issue about predictability. There is a problem, and I'm going to try to solve that with flow metrics. Another problem is people want to save time and money. Maybe their current estimation or estimation techniques that they've got at hand are not appropriate? And can we save time with our historical data that we can use and convert them into flow metrics? So that's usually my second angle of attack when I'm looking at a problem I'm solving and I'm going to use flow metric as a solution. Well, saving time and money is, from my experience, the second point where people are going to ask me, how can you solve that? Third one is transparency. Maybe some of my customers have been complaining that they can't get a fair reading of their team execution. How fast are they delivering value? Maybe story points or estimation techniques are not helping them. T-shirt sizing, for example. So you're looking for that extra transparency. And then again, from my experience, flow metrics really gives us a baseline or common language on how we should measure the productivity of our teams. And finally, what is the problem that I would try to achieve? Well, solve. Sometimes it has been agility. We're in this thing called agile and it's not working. Well, just using flow metrics has pushed one of my customers saying, well, it wasn't really agile that I was trying to solve. My flow metrics is helping me out. I know I'm trying this thing called agile, but it's not really helping me out. And how could I save that or solve that? It's by using flow metrics. So I did ask my questions earlier about what are we trying to solve with flow metrics. Another thing that I'm trying to get on board is people. I've noticed that some people are resistant to change. Maybe you folks have also encountered that in your different work experience, when you're trying to bring something new. Back in the good old days, 20 years ago, when Scrum was popular and we're trying to put that on board, well, that was causing friction with maybe traditional ways of working in place. So we should get people on board to embrace and like and enjoy and appreciate flow metrics. So who should we get on board first, and why should they change? For me, that has been an important question that I'm now asking myself when I'm meeting a new organization is, who should I work with to get those flow metric in place in the organization? So new question to the audience. Based on your experience, who is the most important person or role to get on board with flow metrics? Would it be developers, management, maybe your project manager / your PMO, architects, and maybe Scrum Master Agile coaches? So right now we still have our group of about 25 to 30 people. So let's wait until we get around 15 to 20 answers, and let's move on after that. So we already have some votes on management and developers, and a few people have answered Scrum Master and Agile coaches. I'm getting much more developers and a little bit of management and a little bit of Scrum Masters, but no project managers and architects. Interesting. Take once again, everybody. This makes it also more interesting for me when you're giving me feedback through this survey. Otherwise, it would just be me talking to a screen for an hour. So thank you. So who do I get on board? Well, interestingly enough, for me, getting managers on board has been key for me at implementing, integrating, using flow metrics in my teams, because I had to talk with managers about the productivity of their teams. So as they're looking for results, getting managers to understand the value of flow metrics has been key for me to implementing or using flow metrics within teams. The second person where I've had, or second role where I've had a lot of luck, was with product owners. So since I'm mostly in a Scrum environment most of the time because of my 10 years of teaching Scrum, I've seen product owners really appreciate the use of flow metrics because they're getting better answers from the use of flow metrics than using estimations like story points or velocity. They've really felt that they're more empowered by using flow metrics, and they can have better delivery dates as flow metrics are being based on the historical data of their teams. Well, for product owners, it has increased their level of confidence or giving them new tools to challenge their teams on specific dates. Third role that I'm trying to get on board usually are going to be agilists. So Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, I try to work with them because there are process management people trying to managing the process. So I do try hard to integrate agilists, and surprisingly, this has been my role that has been the hardest to I'm going to say to convert or to engage with because they're so stuck in their estimation and velocities ways of working that talking about flow metrics is really a difficult conversation, once again, in my experience. And finally, I just wanted to note that managers at the beginning, that also included project managers. For me, in my experience, working with project managers has been really I'm going to say even a charm when I show them flow metrics because I'm giving them answers that they were really struggling to get because they were looking at the timesheets of people, they were trying to do all sort of measurements. And when I use flow metrics, not that they have a aha moment, but they really have a moment of finally, I've got that data that I've been looking for. When I have to go to my steering committee, I'm going to have this new data that is always much more credible because it's based on the team historical data. And I'm kind of surprised because for me, the last group of people that I usually work to get on board will be developers. So maybe at the end of our Q&A, we can talk about why you folks think developers are important. But for me, there's usually the last person that I try to get on board. I really try to get management first, my product ownership team, my process improvement people, and then finally developers to get them on board and make sure that maybe their productivity won't be judged on flow metrics. I got somebody maybe here. Oh, thank you for muting yourself. I was hearing somebody else on the phone on the line. Thank you. But that's not the whole story for me from my experience with flow metrics. There's also risks that I find that are interesting for you folks to maybe identify before you try to implement them because it might hurt the organization at some point or teams when we're going to show another way at looking at the teams or even a portfolio productivity. So for me, what is the role that gets the most impacted? Well, like I was mentioning for people getting on board, maybe developers are at risk. And when I say at risk, I mean will their annual evaluation be at risk when I'm going to show their productivity by using flow metrics? Could that cause some stress and some anxiety on how they're going to be judged or assessed at the end of the year? So for me, it has been a conversation of making sure that flow metrics will not be another way to judge the individual productivity of a developer, for example. Another risk is how do I train people with flow metrics? I've got a group that is pretty or seems to be well seasoned with flow metrics, but the rest of the organization might not know how to juggle, work with those flow metrics. So that might be a challenge of how do I train and get everybody on board so that we understand that new common language of what is throughput, what is age, cycle time and its far cousin, the service level expectation. How do we understand Monte Carlo simulations and their results? So for me, training people has also been a risk to assess and evaluate on how should we handle that risk when we try to integrate flow metrics in a organization. The third risk that I try to identify is, do we have the right tool set? If most of you are using Jira, do we have the right tool set within Jira to see flow metrics within our teams? And if the answer is no, do we have to put in a plugin to get the right flow metrics? If you folks are using more Azure DevOps, well, from my experience, I think Azure DevOps has already a good tool set of plugins to see flow metrics. So assessing your actual tool set to make sure that you can track or expose flow metrics would also be a question that if I would meet a new organization, I would ask that question also to see if that's a risk or not. And finally, a fourth risk that I've been asking myself or I've been confronted in the past is is my organization or my customer ready to talk about probabilities? From my experience, even if flow metrics are not directly probabilities, as soon as you're doing forecasting or predictability, we'll be using probabilities to express a future state of a team. So I've met a customer who was just not comfortable when I was giving him options on when we could have that amount of work items being completed in, let's say, 60 days. That customer was just not comfortable when I was giving him options of, let's say, 95% chances of getting there or only 50% chance. That was an organization who was just not used at working with probabilities. And I kind of got kicked out of that customer because I was not talking a language that they were familiar with. So that there may be that question of asking yourself, am I engaging with an organization who is comfortable with probabilities? And maybe lastly, what will be the cost of all of that confusion when we're trying to replace, let's say, for example, story points and velocity with flow metrics? How much time will it take until people actually get it from one system to another? So will that take 2 months, 6 months? Should we start with one project and build on that? There's different strategy, but I think it's also a risk to assess on while we're transitioning, how long will that be? And how long will that confuse people in our meetings? And finally, I can't stress it enough. Are your Kanban board any good? If your Kanban board looked like this, well, if they're already a mess, maybe the first step would be to clean up your boards so that we can all have a shared understanding of how tickets are flowing, so that after that, when we're talking about flow metrics, we're all talking about the same process, the same system. So even before talking about risk or using flow metrics, are your Kanban boards a mess like in this picture, or they are pretty well understood by everybody in your teams? So if you're curious, you can always look at the Kanban workflow priorities. What are the 6 priorities that you should implement or have when you're trying to get a good Kanban board? And for me, where I'm trying to take everybody in this conversation is things I'm seeing signs that things are changing in the last 5 years. So if I look back in the last 5 years, there was this training called, or this class called the PSK, the Professional Scrum with Kanban, launched in 2018 by scrum.org. This, I think, is the only training that offers a certification with Scrum and Kanban integrated together. So that was launched in 2018. After that, well, we've got this great book by a guy in the UK called Andy Hiles. I'm not going to try to pronounce my age. French Canadians have a horrible time pronouncing age, so it's Andy Hiles. He wrote a great book called Applying Scrum with Kanban. I don't know if you've noticed that it's a pointless book. There's a punt in there saying that he won't talk about points or velocity or story points. That's why it's a pointless book. It's published in 2020. After that, what's happening in 2020? Well, we've got prokanban.org that is being founded in 2020 and now pushing classes around flow metrics. After that, we've got flow metrics that are now being the recommended way of forecasting in all of scrum.org courseware. I think that was launched in 2021 or 2022. So now if you would take a scrum.org class, the preferred way of forecasting will always be referred to flow metrics. So that's awesome. That's another things that change our things are changing. In 2022, Will Seal and Dan Vacanti wrote a book called Flow Metrics for Scrum Team. So another conversation happening there. And finally, just this February, there's a new class by ProKanban called Applying Flow Metrics for Scrum that is out on the market. So for me, when I'm seeing that, these are positive change that the market, people are listening, people are curious, and they're adopting or using flow metrics and leaving maybe behind our old agile ways of working. And this comes back all the way to the Agile Manifesto, which always that says at the bottom top, if you folks don't remember, at the top of the manifesto, it says, we are discovering new ways of working. if I'm correct. Well, I believe flow metrics are one of those new ways of working, and we should put maybe estimation in a museum called the Agile Museum and looking for maybe a new way of working. So maybe we're trying to find a balance between story points and velocity, which was our old ways of working. And in the last few years, there was this trend called no estimate. And for me, this was a hard conversation when I was talking with a manager or a customer with the no estimate approach of giving him a date for one or many items. This was a difficult conversation. So for me, flow metrics is the right balance of really answering that question of when will I be done with a delivery. So if I've got one ask to all of the audience after this talk is the next time you see that annual Agile survey go through on LinkedIn, and you can just click on it and answer the survey, can you mention that it doesn't mention flow metrics? That would really help me out, not just myself, but I believe the entire Agile/Lean community, if we could really start seeing not just that Kanban practice or that Kanban board, but really when in a few years, I'd like to see what is the preferred number one thing that is being used as a way of planning work. I would really hope or cross my finger that we were going to see flow metrics at the top of that survey. So what can you do to promote flow metrics in your industry? I'll finish on that question. If I've still got a few people are still with us, you can still go on menti.com and type in your answer of how can you promote in your industry, in your workplace? Showing the impact, do my work as Agile coach. That's awesome. I wish more Agile coach would listen up for flow metrics, adopt them, just start with measuring them. Yep, just start using them, showing the results to management. Totally agree. So I'm at the end of my presentation. It's time to say thank you very much for listening and engaging with me through Mentimeter, everybody. I'll now throw it back to Corrado, who will monitor the chat for our Q&A, and I'll stick as long as people want to talk about flow metrics. Corrado?
Thank you, Louis-Philippe. Actually, in this moment, there are no questions in the chat. So if someone has some question, can simply jump in and make the question. Please turn on the camera. In the meantime, I'm sending a very quick, easy to do poll just to understand the people that actually are joining. So if you have the opportunity to give your 2 seconds to respond. Well, actually, from my side, I have a question just maybe to break the ice. Okay, what is the population that actually you are struggling more in your experience to introduce this different approach of measuring the work? I mean, not estimation, but analyze the flow. This is what I mean.
My people have less interest are usually Scrum Masters and Agile coaches. People are promoting the inspect and adapt way of working. I think there's a key learning on inspecting and adapt our own ways of working. And for me, Scrum Masters and Agile coaches are not doing that enough. They're good at blaming our teams, mocking them on LinkedIn about that. But when it's time to look at your own selves, I think there's a weakness there.
Yeah, actually, there is a comment more than a question from Candice in the chat that, Candice, can you explain or expand what you are writing in the chat, please?
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was just around how any tips on getting organizations to actually buy plugins for flow metrics, because that's where I find the resistance is. They like the idea of it, but then when you find a plugin and it's chargeable, they don't want to go down that road because obviously story points and velocity is what they're used to, and it's free.
Yeah, I hear you, Candice. The way I try to sell it is, are we wasting time or are we having the right conversation? For example, let's say you're doing a Scrum or maybe just Kanban with that stand-up meeting every day. Are we having the right conversation when we're talking about or using story points, for example, in that stand-up or at that sprint planning? So for example, at sprint planning, if we are doing a lot of estimation and pointing, let's say we're wasting an hour every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks based on the length of your sprint. Well, if you sum that up for an entire year, how much waste are we doing every planning or refinement at pointing stories? And how much does that add up? I've calculated that when I'm teaching my classes that for just one sprint, we're wasting about between 5K to 10K, and this is in Canadian dollars, of time of people. So let's say for a team of 5 or 6 people, if they're wasting 2 or 3 hours per sprint, and let's say they're going to be at $100 per hour, you can show quickly to management that you're wasting maybe a few $1,000s per month. And that could be a good argument to say, well, I've got this tool, and for maybe just 500 or $1,000 per month, we could be more efficient in our meetings. And that's just for sprint planning if we want to remove story points and velocity. Let's say we're talking about the daily stand-up. If we would talk about the age of items instead of just asking the 3 questions, well, that might be a little bit harder to put a quantity on the numbers of minutes saved, but we could just have better conversations. So that could be maybe an argument of saying using flow metrics, and that's just at the team level, we can have the right conversations sooner. And that if you've got, let's say, a more of a portfolio level, well, using flow metrics at the portfolio level, maybe you can start saying, well, these are your projects that are not moving forward at your portfolio board. Does that help a little bit, Candice?
Yeah, no, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the meantime, Adam added the comments on how you can measure, let me say, for free, the cycle time and the work in progress in Jira. And this is remind me, Louis-Philippe, a question that in Jira, it's really difficult to measure the throughput. Is there a simple way apart of, let me say, extracting the data in Excel or something like that?
Not for me. Maybe one day the folks at Jira will get it. I still do extracts when I don't have a lot of access to plugins. I still do it manually. I've got a spreadsheet on my website, Pacemaker. This was not a shameless plug. I still use a spreadsheet just to do a lot of calculations by hand.
Yeah. But it was just a curiosity because actually what we have done in our company is that we have created a web hook into Jira with Power BI. Then we are extracting in Power BI the data. And so with this, let me say, with the raw data, actually, you can calculate the throughput, but I can understand that this is not for free. Yeah, there are some comments in the chat. For example, Manuel suggested to use the Actionable Agile website. Actually, I don't know if you know, but one of the tools in Actionable Agile is the Twig game. And actually, in the Twig game, you can also import the data. You have to prepare the data in Excel, but you can import the data, and then you can see the analysis that actually you can do with that. About the tool, again, I love to remind the events with Sonia that actually is promoting, is building a tool like this that is called Navi. That actually is a tool like Actionable Agile. So again, you have different opportunities eventually. Oh, well, there is an interesting comment coming from Glasgow. Please, Julian, can you share your thought with Louis-Philippe?
sorry, I can't turn on the camera now because I have quite a lot happening here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Sorry,
can,
Julian,
Julian.
your voice
Yes.
is very low. Please.
Yes, I might not be able to talk. There are too many things happening around here. So what I'm saying basically is when I function as a product manager, I like the fact that story points illuminates the initiative. It gives everybody an understanding of what we're about to build, and it gives all stakeholders the depth of what we're about, the length and the width and the breadth of what we're building. So, and during refinements, it allows the nominated product owner to gather more information, glean more insights, and do some more research. So for me, dumping the story points will afford me to lose all of these benefits. So what has it got to say about this collaborative effort, these benefits of the story point?
For me, it's using the service level expectation. So I'm going right on the kanbanguides.org. Are you familiar, Julian, with the service level expectation?
Not really, to be honest.
No problem. So the service level expectation is something in the Kanban guides. It's like the distant cousin from the flow metrics, if I could say it that way. And it's a forecast of how long it should take for one work item to flow from start to finish. So during those refinement period, instead of using a conversation around story point, the question we'll ask to our team will be, do you think that we can complete this work item under the service level expectations? So if your service level expectation is 8 days or less, we'll just have a conversation which can be thumbs up or thumbs down. Can we do this in 8 days or less? If everybody does thumbs down, oh, we've got maybe a big word item to maybe refine. And the same conversation will follow of, let's do a little bit of analysis on the problem at hand that we have to break up in little pieces. So the conversation about collaboration and knowledge sharing is still there. It's just that the way of doing that, of creating that conversation, will not be around story points, but around the service level expectation, which is based on the cycle time of your historical data. Does that answer a bit of your question, Julian?
Yes, I can see where you're going with this.
So instead of having a, oh, I think this is a 2, this is a 3, no, I think it's a 5, it's mostly going to be, can we do this in X number of days? And if everybody says thumbs up, end of the conversation. Everybody believes that we can do this in 8 days or less, which is our SLE. That's the end of the conversation. And going back to Candace, that was saying, how can I justify a new plugin? Well, that would be another way. If you've experimented with the SLE in your refinement or planning meetings and seeing that you are saving time by just using the SLE instead, you're actually saving time instead of the, this is a 5, this is a 6 conversation. Anything you want to add, Julian?
Well, I think I'm satisfied because what you rightly pointed out to the two primary concerns I had been the knowledge transfer and the issue of collaboration and everybody working together. Because for me, one of the things I've achieved with Flow Metrics really is collaboration and everybody knowing exactly what is going on and seeing, because like it is said that an image, a visual will speak 1,000 words better, so everybody is saying that. But to be honest, I've been using both of them. I need everybody to get on board because I understand the purpose, and that was I appreciated when Scrum Guide introduced the product goal, because we need to have a focus. We need to have conversations about where we're going to be sure that we're not being wasteful. So with the service level expectation, I think is also a good start for such conversation.
Right. Good to hear, Julian. Oh, you're muted, Corrado.
In the chat, there are a few comments around the class of services that are related to the Kanban University, let me say, flavor of Kanban. So can you, before telling your thoughts about that, there is a quick question from Justin that I can actually make for him. Does your service level of expectation include the weekend days, elapsed days? So please.
For me, it does. I'm going back to the theory and even Dan Vacanti's first book, where we're going to talk about elapsed days. If I look at the definition of our measures here, our cycle time, which is this service level expectation, is based on your cycle times. Your cycle time will be the amount of elapsed time. So elapsed time for me is really calendar days. So weekends are counted in there. I do want to refer people to Dan Vacanti's first book if you really want to have a long explanation on why it's elapsed days. But I'm pretty much in line with this definition.
Thank you. And any thoughts about classes of service and maybe tracking different speeds, different SLE, or what else, different cycle times?
I use it for my work item types, but I'm from the school of pro-kanban.org, where it's not really mentioned a lot, the class of service. So for me, it's mostly looking SLEs per work item types, but I really don't go any further in that line of thought, if I could say it that way. I'm seeing you smile, Corrado. I think you're going to be proud of my political answer there.
Yeah, very political one, very political one. Absolutely. Just scrolling the chat. Yeah, there is a reference from Adam about making work visible, but miss the Grandis. And also Daniel Lencioni. Yeah, we are talking about the elapsed days, okay? Just... Okay, any other questions from the audience? Yeah, there is a, let me say, more than a question, a line of thoughts about using the story points together with the flow metrics, okay? So for example, we continue to make estimation and we analyze the flow metric with the estimation that we have. I think this is the line of the conversation. So what you can tell about using story pointing together with flow metrics?
For me, since I've been using flow metrics for the last, 5, 6, 7 years, usually when I meet a new customers and story points are in place, I'll usually do the correlations between story points and cycle times and see if there is a correlation. Because, I don't know if you folks remember, a 1-point story point should take less time than a 2-point story points. That level of complexity, effort, a 1 story points should take maybe 1 or 2 days versus a 5 story points, which should take much more time. So I've been always doing that when I meet a new customers and story points are in place, and I've never found a correlation when I look at the cycle time and compare them with story points. I do invite people on the call to do it, and if you've managed to show a correlation, good for you. You're my black swan, like I say. Good for you, but in all of my last years of consulting, I've never seen a correlation. So that's also an indicator that maybe we're wasting time or not using the right tool to be to give dates onto our customers.
Absolutely on that. Absolutely. Okay. In the meantime, I don't know if you can see, but I'm sharing the results of the poll that I launched a few minutes ago. Actually, almost 50% of people is in the first time in the session. So thank you for joining. And there are 20% of persons that actually have been more than 5 times in one of the sessions of the community. So my invitation before giving the last word to Louis-Philippe is join our channels on YouTube, on LinkedIn. I put in the chat the references. And clearly, I hope that you will be able to join our next session in October. Louis-Philippe, one last thought about the flow metrics. So, for example, what is your number one tip to introduce flow metrics, in particular with the business guys that, as you mentioned, probably they are not really used to talk in terms of, let me say, probability and range.
Yeah, that's when I'm with people, people that don't like probabilities, I'll usually try to assess their risk. Do they want a safe, confident level as a delivery date? And if they say yes, I'll usually pick that 95% percentile or 85 percentile. I'll just use that date, letting them know that there's some risk, but that's as deep as I go.
Yeah, actually, about that, if I can share my personal experience, it's really fun because very likely business guys don't think in terms of probability because they know what is going to happen. Okay, so it's not about the risk, but it's about, let me say, the when and not the if. So sometimes it's really, really challenging if you want to, again, move the conversation to a different level. Okay, there is time just for one last question, if you have. On the contrary, I will say thank you to Louis-Philippe for your time, for lunchtime, I think, in your country, for sharing with me and the other guys of this community. And oh, there are 3 new messages. Yeah, thank you. So perfect. The video will be available in our YouTube channel because Louis-Philippe confirmed that we can publish. So stay tuned in our social and you will receive the information when the video will be available. And again, thank you all for joining. I hope that you like the session. And again, hope to see you in the next event. Thank you, Louis-Philippe. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks, Louis-Philippe.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.